Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. Norwich City are back at Carrow Road tomorrow after 28 days away. They take on Watford in their sixth championship game of the season, and there is a little bit of pressure on them after a 1-0 loss to Swansea last week. The Hornets have also been in good form. They've started the season well under Tom Cleverley, but Norwich have the confidence provided by a 20-game unbeaten streak at their home stadium, and they'll hope to add to the 5 points they've already amassed. You know the drill on this programme. I'll start by giving you my predicted 11 that I think Johannes Hoff Thorup will choose for the game. Then we'll take a little look at Watford and the tactical test that they'll pose and how the game might pan out from a strategic point of view. And then we'll take a look at a topical tactical point for Norwich, and one of those at the moment is the right wing position. That feels like the debate that we are fairly regularly having. So I assure you we'll come on to all of those elements, but we'll start with my predicted 11. So without further ado, here's the team I think Thorup will choose to take to the pitch at Carrow Road. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Jack Stacey at right back, Jose Cordoba and Callum Doyle in the centre of defence, with Ben Cruzene at left back, Kenny McLean, Marcelino Nunez and Oscar Schwartau in midfield, with Ante Cianat on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent on his own through the middle up front. There's a few talking points there, and we'll start in the centre of defence, which is where I think we've had a lot of discussion already this season. Of course, a lot of fans wondering when they'll see Cordoba from the start in a league game. We're still yet to see that, and I think now might actually be the time that Johannes Hoff Thorup chooses to turn to that. He mentioned in a press conference a few weeks ago that he would consider having two left-footed centre-backs next to each other. I think when you look at his choices, that would have to be Doyle and Cordoba. And I think when you look at the weaknesses that there were at Swansea and some of the strengths that Watford provide, and of course we'll come on to those, it makes sense for Norwich to have a bit more pace going in behind. And Cordoba is somebody who I think has been very highly rated behind the scenes since he came to the club, since he was signed. They were very pleased with that signing, and he's probably somebody who Thorup has actually wanted to get into his team. There are a few head coaches who see someone, rate them that highly, and then don't want to get them into the 11. But to be fair to the defence, and to Shane Duffy in particular, who was getting quite a lot of criticism, he actually has stepped up since the start of the season, and the defence was working for Norwich. But there is a bit of a lack of pace in the centre of defence with Doyle and Duffy as it is, and I think if they want somebody who gives them that slightly more athletic option, then Cordoba is that man, as well as added benefits sort of on the ball. So I could see that happening. I could also see Callum Doyle moving out to left back and Jose Cordoba taking his position at centre back. But as we've spoken about a lot, you want Doyle on the ball as much as possible and available from the start of that possession period. And obviously, if he's at left back, it's harder for Norwich to do that. So I've gone for Doyle and Cordoba at centre back. Again, quite a marginal call, but that's what I've gone for. In midfield, and this plays into the right wing debate that we're going to have a little bit, but I've got Oscar Schwartau in there. Of course, he started theoretically out wide against Swansea, ended up playing a lot of the time in the centre of the pitch, and I actually think that's where he's best suited. That's where he spent most of his career, and he looks like a sort of typical number 8, number 10. He's got a bit of that physicality as well. That means he can play as one of the two more advanced midfielders in that three that Thorup deploys, and I also think it suits him to face the play and to be on the ball when he's got options in front of him, rather than with his back to goal, which was how he received it a lot of the time against Swansea. Maybe struggled with some of the physical approach that Swansea gave. And I don't think he's a player defined by physicality or especially strong, but he definitely has that element, and certainly more than maybe you'd expect of an 18-year-old who's just come from the Danish league. So I think he could play that number 8 position. I think that is probably the position where we'll see him end up playing the most for Norwich. And I could see, given how it's gone with Michael Forson in the last few games, obviously the own goal against Swansea, and I think since Stevenage in the Cup, really, he hasn't quite been at his best. I could see Thorup seeking a solution to that problem and concluding that Schwartau is that man. So I've gone for him in midfield, then the right wing debate, and of course we'll come on to this more in a broader sense, but I've gone for Crnac just because I think right now, while Thorup is still looking for who his best option is, I think very, very slightly Crnac is sort of the first choice. I thought it was a pretty decent cameo for him against Swansea off the bench, and with Schwartau out of that position, and I thought actually that was the best he's played in that role. Probably for Norwich, obviously no huge contributions, but it hasn't been an especially fast start. Still quite a lot to prove for the 20-year-old, but I think Thorup right now just about sees him as the man whose shirt it is to lose. So I've gone for him at right wing. Again, a few different options for Thorup there that he could decide from, but the rest of the team speaks for itself, really. I can't see drastic changes just because of that Swansea loss, and I think we are getting ever so slightly closer to the new head coach knowing what his best 11 is. So that's what I've gone for Norwich. Now, if we move on to Watford and some of their tactical strengths, the first thing I'll say actually, and what I noted when I was watching them and sort of trying to break down how they play, was that actually tactically they are a really good side who have solutions to a lot of problems, and where you think you might spot a weakness, they have players to cover that weakness, and where you see maybe a tactical hole in the setup, actually they've adapted things slightly so that that is covered as well. First of all, I'll show you the setup that I think they'll use. This is a sort of rough approximation of the 11 that Cleverly might choose, and there are a few players who it looks like there will be late calls on injury-wise, but just mainly to sort of show you the formation and the setup. Here's an approximation of the 11 that they might put out at Carrow Road. Now, probably the first thing you noticed there was that Watford under Cleverly play a 3-4-3, and that's nothing remarkable in and of itself. It's a formation that isn't especially popular at the moment, but it's definitely one that Norwich will have played against and will play against again. But when you examine the way that Watford play, some of their strengths, some of the things that Norwich will try to exploit as well, that formation is so key in it, and especially in the wide areas and how Watford try to make use of those, because in that 3-4-3 setup, the wingers on the front line aren't really very close to the flanks whatsoever. They love to come inside. They tend to operate more as sort of advanced number 10s or secondary strikers to bio in that main number 9 position, and that means that there is plenty of space out wide for the wing backs, because those inverted wingers are talented, they're creative, they do take up a lot of defensive attention and resource. That means that those wing backs can get on and create chances out wide, and that's where they've done a lot of their damage so far this season. So it's something that Norwich's fullbacks and wingers will need to be bang on in terms of their defending and their tactical awareness and their attention span and keeping concentrated. And I think I mentioned Crnac earlier in terms of maybe some of the attacking contribution, but when you look at him and Stacey and how they've defended together down that flank at times, that might be a concern for Norwich, because I don't think they're quite in tandem with that yet, and they would really need to be to defend against Watford. But even if they do manage to nail that down, and they maybe want to nullify the wide threat, and they defend a little bit wider, that then leaves space in the inside channels for those number 10s, inverted wingers, however you want to label them, to then go and cause damage, which they also have done at times when opposition have tried to counteract the attacking system in that sense. So it is a really strong attacking system for Watford, and a really good way of making use of the wings and the wing backs and the formation that they use. But you look at how teams could maybe get at them, and those wide areas on the counter are something that Norwich will have to try to exploit if they want to get the best out of a counter-attacking opportunity. Obviously, Norwich want to control possession. They want to control games under Thorup. That's something he's spoken about a lot, and I'm sure they would prefer to control possession for as much of the game as possible. But those openings may well be there if Norwich can intercept the ball in the right areas with those wing backs bombing on and only the back three there to defend. Obviously, you have a bit more cover than if you're playing a back four and your full backs are bombing on, but equally the wing backs can be so offensive at times that does leave quite a large area for that back three to cover if you can get past the midfield and the 2 players that they have in there, as opposed to the 3 that Norwich will have, of course. So numerically, there is that advantage, and you'd say that Norwich can get at that midfield as well. But this is another real strength of Watford's setup, is that they have Tom Delibashiru in there and Musa Sissoko, who I think we all know about the qualities of. Obviously, Champions League final player with Tottenham, and still has a lot of that strength and that quality in midfield. So Watford do have that physicality that maybe Norwich struggled with at times against Swansea. So if you try to avoid the wide areas and some of the strengths that they have, focus things on the midfield, then Watford, in terms of personnel, if not numerically, do have quite a lot of strength in there. So I think they've crafted a tactical setup that does present a real problem for their opposition. It means that it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, and probably a bit of a struggle for Thorup to nail down the area that he's going to try to expose in the Watford system. I'm sure he's got a plan, and I'm sure, of course, that he's got a lot more experience in this area than me. But you just look at Watford and the way that they've played so far this season, the way that they're set up, and you have to give it to Cleverley, because it is very, very clever, if you pardon the pun. I promise you that wasn't planned. And I think it is a problem for Norwich. So yeah, definitely something that adds to that difficulty. We've spoken about Watford's strengths, and you do wonder how Norwich will try to get around that. It certainly will be an interesting one from a tactical point of view. Now we're going to finish with a bit of discussion about that right wing position. It's definitely one that's ignited a bit of debate among Norwich fans. It might be the position that I've got wrong the most this season on the predicted starting 11s, and you can see why, to be honest, when you look at some of the performances from the players who are hoping to claim that shirt and hoping to take a regular place in the team in that position. I've gone for Seaman for this one, but it is still a very marginal call. I think technically he struggled a little bit, and that maybe has been the major concern, but you could argue that that side of his game, along with the tactical one, will come with a bit of time when he's got used to this league a bit more, when he's probably had a bit more sleep and a bit less travel than he has in the last few weeks. But tactically, I think he still looks like the striker that he was in Poland before he moved to Norwich, and less like the right winger with some of the defensive responsibilities that he has in that position. I mentioned earlier the fact that him and Jack Stacey maybe haven't quite gelled in that tactical defensive sense. He doesn't look especially convincing coming back and defending on the edge of his own box. And I suppose you can understand that. But right now, without the benefit of time and improvement, you can see for Thorup's team selection why that might be a problem. There's also Oscar Schwartau, again, somebody I mentioned in terms of the struggles that he had against Swansea, and being in that inverted right wing position does mean you spend a lot of time with your back to goal, and I'm not sure that really suits him, as I mentioned. If it was a sort of more traditional chalk on the boots type winger, then there would be a bit more of that time and a bit more ability to face up the opposition and face the goal that you're aiming at. But when it's in that inverted, almost number 10 type role, it is quite difficult to receive the ball facing goal and with a bit of time to assess your options and try and create something. So I'm not sure it especially suits Schwartau. Then there's Cade Gordon, who of course we haven't yet seen in a Norwich shirt, has had his first full week training with the team this week. So I wonder if he plays some sort of role against Watford. It would be good to see what he has to offer, because he does give you a bit more of that traditional directness from a winger, and although he is left-footed coming off the right, so he won't be necessarily very often inclined to go outside the defender and cross the ball in from out wide, he will take players on, he will try and use his dribbling skill, and I think that is a really interesting element, because I think that's something that Norwich could benefit from. It probably breaks up some of the logjam that is created by the possession-based system when it isn't working very well. But equally, that's what they've got from Borja Sainz. And you get the sense from the role that Thorup is asking his right wingers to play, that he wants something slightly different. He wants something maybe more of a number 10 mould coming off that wing. And I'm not sure Gordon really is that man, but definitely somebody who will hope to impress, and I'm sure all Norwich fans are keen to see before long. There's also Christian Crnac, who of course is out injured at the moment. I think we've discussed him previously, and everyone probably knows that the strengths and pitfalls of that man, but equally not an option for Thorup at the moment, obviously. And then that leaves us with, aside from the other sort of slightly more abstract potential solutions, on Hernandez. Now, I wrote a piece about him earlier this week about whether he had earned a starting berth after another impressive cameo against Swansea. He also looked pretty good from the start against Crystal Palace. Some other impactful substitute performances so far this season, and I think the response to that article probably tells you a lot about how Norwich fans see him at the moment. I think few would trust him in a starting role and would pick him in a starting role if they had the choice, but equally he does have that impact. He does have a slightly different style of play than maybe any of his sort of winger colleagues have in that Norwich squad. So I think he would give them something different, but equally I fall on the same side as a lot of people when it comes to the fact that actually he thrives against sort of tired legs. He thrives in a substitute environment where he can come on and make an instant impact, and there maybe isn't as much of the concentration, the tactical requirement that there is from the start, and some of the other elements that there are as a starter that maybe you benefit from not having as a substitute. So a few problems there for Thorup to answer. Definitely a solution he'll be very keen to find. Let's hope this weekend is the time when he finds it and we can talk about another Norwich win or a result to extend that 20-game unbeaten streak, which is a fantastic record and definitely one that everyone would be disappointed to see end. It won't be easy against Watford for the reasons outlined, but it should be a very interesting game. Of course, we'll have it covered across our channel, so head to pinkun.com for much more analysis, opinion, insight, and the rest of our channels are populated with loads of fantastic stuff as well. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. I'll see you next week, and I'll see some of you, I'm sure, at Carrow Road.